Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Now, over the weekend, the ANC concluded and held its two-day National Lekgotla in Boksburg. As the party tightened monitoring of public representatives, it said the removal of poorly performing deployees would be based on evidence, and not factionalism. The delegates at the Lekgotla drew up a plan of action to fix up a number of government issues, accompanied by clear timelines for when they should be achieved. Joining me now to take this conversation forward, I'd like to welcome political analyst and director of research at ASRI, Angelo Fick. Angelo, always good to have you on. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam to you and to your viewers.
Angelo, the ANC sees it as a proactive approach. What is the view of Angelo Fick in terms of monitoring its public representatives?
Well, it's had internal processes around step-aside rules for a decade now. So the question is not whether they invent new words and new commitments in new words, but whether or not they're willing to apply those, rules and ideals that they set for themselves sufficiently to convince the public, but also to effect the consequences in government. Because at this point, it's not only about winning elections, it's actually about having a survivable state that can be run at the local level. And I think that it's the longer term survival of the African National Congress that is being looked at by those ringing the alarm bells about people in the party deployed into local government that aren't doing what they're required to do.
You bring up something important there, Angelo, survival. And I guess now for the ANC, and you and I were together during the national and provincial elections, and just seeing the drop-off of the ANC was quite deterrent for them. Was that really the wake-up call that they needed when you look at the results of 2024 and now given when you look at what's happening in the local government elections? And even though we're at a stage where coalitions could rule the roost, the ANC still has this confidence that it can solely, with the majority, run the three big metros, especially in Gauteng.
Well, that remains to be seen, because we've seen the tensions in the coalitions formed by the ANC at local level and the national demands of the party. So that, for example, Dado Moreiro, as the mayor of Johannesburg, has seen that the provincial and national dictates of the party have overridden whatever he may have desired as mayor to appoint people into his MMC cabinet. And so one waits to see how those national government of national coalition National Unity Coalition relationships play out at local level. We've already seen parties who are in that coalition at national level flex their muscles at the local level, in Johannesburg for one, starting motions of no confidence several times against the ANC deployee in the mayor position. And one imagines that those kinds of conflicts will persist. And this may be why the ANC's NEC decided that they must push for a certain kind of legal status for coalition agreements, which is the very thing that the DA has been pushing for, and that the Public Affairs Research Institute and various other, sort of research organizations have been pushing for almost half a decade, if not longer. So I think here the test for the ANC is going to be, can they keep their national coalition partners happy while pushing their party agenda at local level, given that very likely they're going to have coalition partners there that may sometimes, but not always, match the coalition partners at the GNU national level.
Angelo, I want to read this quote from President Ramaphosa, speaking at the Lekgotla, and he said, we must have the courage to replace deployees who are not performing the tasks that they're being given. We must also deploy cadres that can fulfill the responsibility of the oppositions they occupy, close quote. Herein lies, I think, the problem is that when you look at the ANC and its sort of step-aside rule, a lot of it has been based on the sort of factionalism. So if you're in the right faction of those who dominate the top seven, you probably are safe. It's great for the ANC to mention it, obviously, as a sort of talking point. But in terms of the action of the ground, does the ANC have that sort of ability to go ahead and replace deployees that are part of a faction which has quite a number of strength within the NEC?
So I think it goes beyond merely the factions. I also think it goes towards what people are seen to or have done for the party, and therefore the strengths of branches that they see and delegates that they see supporting them. And this is going to be very crucial in the election cycle inside the ANC that's coming up ahead of 2027. So traditionally, people, and this is not just for the ANC, but for all parties who are loyal to the party, who further the party's interests, have been protected, and where they've come into disrepute at local government or even national and provincial government deployment level, they've simply been reassigned to new positions. So a few years ago, there was a lot of unhappiness that people who were underperforming or implicated in maladministration allegations at local government level in one municipality would be removed from that municipality and deployed to a completely different municipality where they simply proceeded to do, the same damage in the new location that they were accused of doing in the old location. The question that the ANC, I think, is facing is whether or not they can really focus on qualified individuals. And there are many of those qualified individuals in the party's ranks who will be deployed to do what cadre deployment was originally designed to do, which is to take your best and your best suited and deploy them to, implement party policy at government level. That, I think, is attached additionally to the issue of corruption and maladministration. It's not just that people are inept or that they're unable to do the work that they're deployed or employed and paid to do as civil servants or even as MMCs in local government as municipal managers, but also that they are sometimes implicated in corruption and deviation of the processes of government. And the ANC's record on that has not been stellar with voters. So I think it's not just the internal party step-aside rule, but the party's willingness to support the removal of people from structures where they have been causing damage, and then supporting the criminal processes that are in place, particularly given the very stringent laws that apply at local government level around public finance management, municipal finance management, and anti-corruption legislation, and whether or not whistleblowers will be protected when those people are outed. And not just at the faction level, but people with influence or people close to those with power, whether they are the current sitting president of the party, Mr. Ramaphosa, or whether they are the figures in the ascendant for that presidential position in the party, Mr. Mashatile, or various other individuals with senior positions, as you pointed out, in that top 7 structure of the party.
Angelo, currently, you mentioned the city of Johannesburg. There seems to be, of course, a bit of controversy there in terms of how the voting process had happened when, of course, that regional elections happened in December. So you've got Dada Morero, who's written to the party's provincial leadership. He's alleged there's irregularities, I beg your pardon. During the conference, of course, Lehiso Masuku had won that very same elections. Internal ANC conflicts like this, as much as, of course, the democratic outlook of the ANC in the country allows for this to happen, is this going to hurt them going forward in terms of the local government elections, given that the city of Johannesburg, which is really, if not the most highly contested metro in local government elections, and the ANC still can't get its house in order?
Well, I think that it'll be a question not just for voters, but other observers, in particular, those organizations that are thinking of going into coalition with the ANC, to think about what kind of power they can leverage or lever out of this particular internal disarray. If the party can't run its internal processes with the level of transparency, commitment, and agreement that those who go into the process come out of the process happy that the process has been fair and has not been rigged or compromised or somehow, affected negatively, then one has to wonder to what extent those very same people in that organization will then be able to implement all of the ideals, as you've just quoted Mr. Ramaphosa, to pull local government back from the brink of disaster that it's been teetering on and sometimes falling over that cliff. So I think for very many voters, the question is, if you can't run your affairs inside your own house effectively without people in the house complaining, why should we give you the street to control? For the people who are in negotiation with coalition agreement possibilities after that election, people in those parties are looking to this to say, well, to what extent can we exploit this ahead of the national elections coming up in 2029 to further our own advances and ideas about serving in some subsequent national and provincial national and provincial government coalition agreement. And then I think what's also important to bear in mind is what will happen to coalitions that currently exist if this particular spat continues. And it's not just about political arrangements, it's also about largesse and about resources. The city of Johannesburg has a 90 billion rand budget.
Yeah.
And that budget means control over various entities that are in a relationship to the state, whether it's Pick It Up, whether it is City Power. All of those entities have masses of contracts that are available for public bidding and awarding. And it's that process of beneficiation that can be compromised, which sees service delivery failure of the kind we've seen. If in coalition agreements, people are simply divvying up structures in the city and then giving preferential treatment to certain kinds of bidders, then we sit with a crisis of an auditor general constantly telling us that money is being paid out, services are not being delivered, and people are unhappy on the ground, and that affects a party's long-term survival. For smaller parties, long-term survival may not be on the cards, but for organizations like the Democratic Alliance, the African National Congress, the Economic Freedom Fighters, and even the newer player, the Mkhonto Wesizwe Party, longer-term survival is what they're looking to, rather than just small numbers of people in the party making it into legislatures and therefore being able to benefit in the very shorter term, either enriching themselves or living nice lives as councillors or officials on pensions without longer-term organizational survival.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Angelo Fick. And as the viewer, I just want you to keep in mind local government elections and the ANC. They want the coalition's bill to be passed before the local government elections, which is scheduled to happen this year. News in Focus returns after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with political analyst and director of research at ASRI, Angelo Fick. So the Municipal Structure Amendment Bill, this was introduced in 2024, and it, of course, seeks to make coalition agreements legally binding and introduce other reforms aimed at stabilizing local government. Now, during this weekend's Lekgotla, Angelo, Dixon Masemola, of course, he's also the Deputy Minister of COGTA, and the chairperson of the ANC subcommittee on local government was, of course, quite emphatic that this bill needs to be passed. I think for the purposes of information, Angelo, how important is this bill and what significance would it play in terms of the stabilization of coalitions, especially within metros?
So I think one of the suggestions would be that there's a threshold, a minimum threshold of who can join a governing coalition in order to respect the declared preferences of the electorate, so that you can't have situations where individuals become compromise candidates despite their parties not holding much by way of sway. And we've seen examples of this. One party in the city of Johannesburg, 3 out of 270 seats, and yet it has had 2 mayors in control of the city. And that, of course, leaves you with a mayor who is powerless and really under the thumb of whoever really put them there, and they can be easily removed. What this results in is unstable municipal government, because there can't be an executive program that is implemented consistently. We've also seen this in Tshwane with the 2 major parties, the Democratic Alliance and the African National Congress, while they co-govern at national level, splitting and shifting their mayoral positions based on the coalitions they can form. So I think the idea would be that the coalitions need to be more stable by setting a minimum threshold of who can serve in such coalition government executive positions, so that the relationship between what the voters expressed, however hung that particular municipality's council may be, and what governs the city or municipality has a better relationship. The other thing is also to prevent the kinds of constant shifts back and forth for motions of no confidence for the sake of various kinds of political opportunism. What we need to have in our, I think, local government is for that bill to make sure that people are able to have a structured government, to make sure that the interference in appointments processes of civil servants cannot be done in the way that it has been done, for example, in the city of Johannesburg, where it needed a high court challenge to let the ANC-led coalition know that the appointment of the municipal manager wasn't lawfully done, and that whole process had to be started again. Because what you need in local government is historical memory and the civil service. and implementable executives or executive government that has implementable programs that can be tested before they are replaced and simply rechanged. And the instability is not helpful, particularly in an environment that's also marred by corruption and maladministration. And so this is a bill intended to prevent endless numbers of changes and also a kind of Smarties box approach to coalitions that says anybody that we approach can serve and we can put anybody in any position whatsoever.
I think one of the concerns, Angelo, is, I mean, let's take the city of Johannesburg, and I know we're speaking on that, but I think given that it's probably one of the most, if not the most important metro in this country. I mean, since Umpopalatse was elected May in 2021, we've had 4 mayors, if I stand to be corrected, including the current one, Dada Morero. Would this bill potentially stop the merry-go-round when it comes to mayors? And of course, that, of course, meaning the sort of motion of no confidence, because I think when that happens, it really does create a sense of distrust between the residents of that metro and that of the city council.
Well, one hopes that it prevents the kind of arbitrary removal of officials by politically convenient negotiations that have nothing to do with efficiency. And Johannesburg is not the best example of that. A better example of that would be the city of Tshwane, where the Democratic Alliance-led coalition mayor, Celia Brink, had started doing quite positive things around turning around the city's finances, the metro's finances, and with a very complicated relationship between the African National Congress, the Municipal Workers Union, unhappiness was sowed and a certain kind of regime change was effected. Whether or not that has been to the advantage of the city's finances remains to be seen. And so we've seen these kinds of concerns in places like Kanaland in the Western Cape, where all sorts of arrangements are made, and people who really have the worst kinds of records are placed in mayoral positions. So the question I think that one would have of that bill is whether or not this will prevent opportunistic placement of mayoral or senior cabinet positions in the MMC to parties to get their support without necessarily having a structured, programmatic approach to municipal governance. And that's been the challenge, to go back to Mr. Ramaphosa's statement to his party and its members, that has been at the heart of coalition agreements. Ideally, you want the kind of coalition that you had in the city of Cape Town in 2009 under Helen Zille, which is a coalition in which people thrash out what it is that parties can get, but don't allow minority parties with single votes to be able to scupper executive implement programs that run the municipality. And secondly, what you also don't want is the kind of changing arrangements between parties, where parties can be in one coalition one day and simply move and form a different coalition slightly later that day, not even the next day, and really collapse municipal governance. We've seen it spectacularly in the metros of Gauteng, but for this to really be put into context, we have to remember that in smaller municipalities and towns, you then sit with other kinds of problems. And those problems are that infrastructure backlogs are not being addressed, service delivery backlogs that are now 40 years back from where they should be are not addressed. And so the life chances of people in rural municipalities, in small towns across this country, will be negatively affected because the 30 years of failure to implement proper local government, particularly since 1999, so the last 26 years, 27 years, will then set another generation further back. And all you have to do is take a tour of, or visit people, or for those who do live in places that are not the metros, to see what happens when municipal government fails to deliver because of endless changes. Crispin Alder's written a book about this when it comes to Gqeberha, the old Port Elizabeth, the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. We've seen this in Mangaung, which is currently under administration, and those are not even coalition governments in Mangaung. That's a situation where you have a majority. And so the test for the ANC will not just be, can they manage coalitions better with better legislation, but can they fix where they currently govern outright to convince people who might end up in coalition governments where they are the majority party that they still remain the best option. And I suspect that that is a hard ask because it requires massive internal change for the ANC, as well as pulling those deployees that they've already got in existing government to task and getting them to do it. And I'm not certain that between now and the election there is enough time to undo what is now 2 to 3 decades of maladministration.
Angelo, and I think we'll be hoping to have more conversations with you as, of course, we build up to the local government elections. But looking at where we are now in January, the ANC is not going to humble itself to say, listen, we're willing to work in a coalition, especially in the three major metros. They're still confident that they can have the majority within Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, and the city of Johannesburg. When you look at what 2024 has taught them, are they really still willing to go ahead and accept the fact that majority for the ANC has probably gone past its expiry date for them?
Well, I don't think you can run a political organization with the idea that you're going to go into elections and be defeated. I think you have to go into elections, and we've seen this from the Democratic Alliance with the Economic Freedom Fighters. We're seeing it now from the Mkhonto weSizwe Party. You go into elections saying you're going to get a majority, because if you go in with a defeatist attitude, you're going to underscore because you're not convincing voters that you're likely to win. So I think the ANC is likely to go into several of these things at the rhetoric level, saying they'll get a majority, but they'll also plan, as they did for 2024, for the reality that they may end up in coalitions. I think what they'll want are coalitions that are stronger than the ones that they're currently in, coalitions that work better than the GNU coalition, because the last thing they want is to be at the mercy of small parties as they are at the national level, where we've seen Minister Gaten McKenzie make the most appalling kinds of statements, also, pulling funding from an artist for a variety of reasons, despite the country's national policy on Gaza and its international standing at the ICJ on Gaza. What we're seeing is a minister who can be defiant of public policy that he is sworn to and promulgate other ideas. You can't have that at local government level, where smaller parties are able to hold the bigger parties to ransom for fear of walking across the aisle, so to speak, and making new arrangements, because that is precisely the kind of instability that we've had. And I suspect what we may also begin to think through is, after 2026, 2027, to begin to think of further municipal management reform, to begin to think of minority governance in municipalities, should the results indicate that not even a single party gets above 35%, and none of the 35 or 30% parties want to work together in coalition. And so the kind of model that one is then moving towards is the kind of Belgian or Dutch model, where nobody gets a clear, large share, but everybody's kind of in third range. But you still have to have a civil service that continues to implement local government policy, and you have workable solutions for coalitions that don't necessarily make the 50 plus, but still have a significant proportion of the voter support in order to have governance. Otherwise, what you sit with is dead duck municipalities that are swinging between different coalitions of spite or coalitions of convenience, but there's no implemented structure and policy that results in government and service delivery.
Angelo Fick, always a pleasure having you, and shukran so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
That's Angelo Fick, a political analyst and director of research at ASRI. After the break, we're going to be speaking to Reinald Takuli of the Kruger National Park. We've seen the floods that have caused so much of devastation in that part of the country. And of course, the government is looking at around 700 million rand to create a reconstruction of the park. That conversation is after the break.